So welcome everybody, we're really delighted to see you here. I'm Isabel Hughes and I'm Associate Director here at the Merle, Media Living for a Life, and my colleagues who you've been hearing from, Maddie Gilling is the Collections Officer and works particularly on our Arts Council funded activity, something called Museums Partnership Reading, where we work with the Town Museum, Reading Museum, and Ollie Douglas, who's Curator of the Project Collections for Museum Living for a Life. And together we've created this programme with some wonderful guest speakers, some of whom have come quite a long way. We are quite a select little gathering, which is quite interesting because we, I think you might have seen from the programme that this is us back on track, that we were originally going to be part of an IEMA meeting, a congress in fact, a big meeting of all the members in 2021. And of course, COVID got in the way, and we turned ourselves into a virtual congress, which was, I think, Ollie, reasonably successful, wasn't it? But it wasn't the same as being able to see what we have. So we wanted to have the opportunity to share this. And it's a bit of an experiment going back to face after all the years of COVID and things moving online. I think we very much value the opportunity to share this more widely on our various channels. So we hope to be able to do that. And just to mention our two organisations. So I'm a committee member, as are some others here, of IEMA, International Association for Agricultural Museums. And we're a membership organisation. We have a very reasonable annual subscription. And we have institutional membership as well. And it's really a meeting place for people in agricultural museums, but also working on rural projects of all sorts. So we're a broad church, interested in academics, people working in different types of wildlife trusts and so on, but having an interest in agriculture and rural issues. And the Rural Museums Network is a subject specialist network that was originally set up in partnership with, I think, Museums, Libraries and Archives Council of Britain, and is now sort of sponsored a little bit by the Arts Council, but it's a membership for United Kingdom museums, but it does welcome international members, I think. Membership fees, it has a very small, yeah. I must say, for those of you, for those of you who haven't ventured into it, it is an absolute bargain, and it is a mine of useful information, not least to everyone putting up images of things they found in their stores that they like. So do look at each other's organisations, because I think it's really important for us to work together. But also, I hope during the day you may find that you can talk to someone from the other organisation and see where there's a meeting of minds. So we're going to start off today talking about Our Country Lives, which is the big redevelopment project that the Merle was involved in nearly 10 years ago now. But we'd like to present it, at least to start with, as an innovation, because we've never really shared the ins and outs of how we got there before, and then move into what we're doing, building on Our Country Lives. So I shall start off and get this going. Okay. This is an image of our museum in its very early days, and the museum was established by the university in 1951, and it was really a project of the agriculture department. So academics who were very clear that agriculture was changing radically post Second World War, and could see that traditional ways of farming were disappearing, and they wanted to record them. So it was very much a sort of salvage operation of the early technologies that are not motorised, don't involve the combustion engine, and they made connections with farmers that they knew, but also farmers that they met at agricultural shows. And this is an image of the museum setting up its camp in Newton Abbot, I think, in 1950s, 52. Yeah, so you can see that they would make a pitch to farmers to say, you know, what have you got? What are you getting rid of? Can we purchase it, or would you donate it? And we still have parts of this in our collections. We still have the sign, which has been up in the museum, which is a lovely thing. And also these sort of model model ploughs that are on stilts here. I believe we still have them. We haven't quite removed them from the galleries.
Yeah, they were on display at the Festival of Britain the year before. So they formed a series of displays about ploughing.
Yeah. So then the next question was where should we put this collection? And to start with, it was up on the main campus of the university, which some of us have explored yesterday, going up the hill a bit. And we have a building called Old White Knight's House, which was one of the original buildings to do with the university. So there were displays in there, but also some of the collections were just outside around the campus, around that area. And then they were looking for a home. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether this one is in the home that was their second home, Ollie. Come across this one. It's a crafts and tools exhibition. You can see it maybe doesn't satisfy our display needs today. But for 1964, it was possibly had its
I think that is a temporary exhibition in Old White, what's now Old White Knight's House.
So that was possibly still in the first manifestation of it. But then the collection was moved into temporary buildings. And those temporary buildings became almost permanent because we didn't move out of there until about 2000. And the collection got bigger and bigger and very difficult for people to see all of it, but also to research any of it because it was so crammed in. And then the university got behind a lottery scheme and we were able to move down into this building. And the gallery that you'll see with the object collection was a new build from 2000-ish and opened around 2004. Now, I started here in 2011, and one of the things that when I interviewed for the job, I had to do a presentation on what did I think I would want to do. So I have to say these are rather biased photographs because I was thinking, yes, I need to flag up where it's not really working and what we could do about it. But so there may be better images that other people might say, no, it did operate well. Going into the entrance, it happened that the construction of the building had a wall fairly prominently early on in what was the reception area. And that meant that you couldn't see what was beyond the wall. So you had no idea what you were going to find. And to compound that, they put an audio-visual there, which was actually very, very good. But I rather gather that you know, as it often happens, if you have an audio-visual that's continuously playing, it annoys the hell out of the staff. Eventually, they said, "Well, we'll not put it on unless people request it." So what you walked in on was a black screen with a very small image in the middle, which appeared slightly random. And the other thing that happened with the presentation, which was wonderful, was that there were objects behind this glass, this black glass, and they would be lit one by one, and they were wonderful. But a lot of people never saw them because they didn't know to ask about the AV, so it was all a bit puzzling. There was a very good area for people to sit around. As you can see, we've got these sort of sitting room type chairs, and there were some activities going on. You can see a plastic tub with toys and things. There were some pretty good things going on for under fives. But then you would start the visit going around the corner where you can see the wheels, and they're up high, which was an interesting innovation, but somewhat puzzling. Why you would walk in and find them up there, and it was very much an open storage sort of scheme with some interpretation. That's a bit further into it, and projects were divided into types of materials. So it started off with a very big wood section. So it would have a couple of wagons in it to do with that, but then other wood things. And then there was metal, which had a lot of the knives and cutting tools and so on. And then there was straw and there was leather. But actually, a lot of people didn't realise that. So it became something that was a treasure trove. It was fantastic, but you didn't quite know where you were going and what you were doing. And it got busier and busier because they started off with a huge empty space And then we thought, we've got to put all the collection in. And then we have no off-site storage for the object collection, so they literally had to fit everything in. And so every few yards you would come across a wagon, because we have rather a lot of them. And they were sort of used as barriers between different bits of displays. But it was quite a burden to have to interpret a wagon and then another wagon and another one throughout the display. So these were some of the things that I thought about. This was an area which was made to look like a tree. So it was to make the connection between the wood and how people have used wood to make things. So we had a series of sort of butter stamps of various sorts. You can see there's a handle for a spade or something hanging. So some interesting ways of dealing with the collections. And this wasn't when I was here, but it's an example of, this was the temporary exhibition space. And it had the problem, this was a particularly popular one, as you can see, that it was very difficult to build temporary exhibitions, because if you say we've got an exhibition going on and it's successful, a lot of people will turn up there with an expectation. And actually what we had was a very small space. So they were either a bit inconsequential, or they were too big for their boots, that they didn't really fit in the space. So there was something not right about temporary exhibitions, I felt. So these are just some observations that I made, and then obviously I got the job, and my first task was to think about what was the change and what level of change, and eventually we turned it into a multi-million-pound lottery project. But I started off trying to find out what went on at the moment, and we did various bits of work trying to track what visitors were doing, and this involved getting volunteers to discreetly follow people around and then gather information such as we could. So some interesting things, that the average person looked at 2 presentations. We had quite a lot of A&E presentations, but quite a lot of people looked at none of them. And the temporary exhibition space had a 5-minute dwell time, which seemed rather unfair for the amount of work that had gone into the exhibitions. We did a survey during the week and found that a lot of visitors were retired, but then that was a weekday survey. And one of the problems was that we thought weekdays was the busiest time of the week to do the survey, but actually it turned out it was skewing things a bit. But the dwell time, 30 minutes or an hour, and most people had come to see the main displays and felt they had seen them. And then something about the profile, that we were quite Reading focused. We used to run this event called the Village Fete, and we would get quite a significant percentage of our total visitor figures in that one day, where people would come and use the garden, and we had a beer tent and all sorts of activities going on, and there were vintage vehicles and so on. And it was wonderful, but very few people actually went into the museum as a result of it, so it had become a sort of parallel activity. The displays were definitely taking a back seat in that sense. So the other thing that we did some work going into the local shopping centre and surveying, and we were one of those venues that all people were always meaning to come. And sometimes they would say, "Oh, I know you. You're on white nights in those temporary buildings." We say, "No, we've moved into a new building." So we knew they hadn't had any contact with us for years if they said that. Or they would just say, "Yeah, it's wonderful. Never been. Love to come," but they didn't. So you can see we have various missions. We started to think about who were we going to be here for, what was going to be the focus of our audience development. And this was sort of very early days thinking about things, but we gradually refined them so that we were being more and more specific. And I think that helped us in our mind's eye, not just thinking about the displays, but also thinking about associated activities, which you'll hear more about from our colleague Philippa Heath later. Because those of you who've been involved in lottery projects will know that you have to, alongside any capital works, do work on an activity plan and make sure that you offer activities and opportunities for new target audiences to come and learn about the collections. So we still have these audiences today in our mind's eye, and we're thinking about refining them again. But they're certainly a point of discussion. So we're not saying we're not a specialist museum with a designated nationally important collection, but we want to reach out to communities. And very important for us is this idea of we know that the collections are very much beyond living memory for many of our visitors. So there are very few connection points now that you won't have a relative who would know exactly what this was and how it was used. And they come for many different reasons. So we need to find sort of different connecting points for collections. We had a lot of discussions about our interpretation. As I was sort of perhaps being a bit mocking, but there was a reason the interpretation was the way it was. And I think it was, as Ollie's mentioned this recently, it was in a constructivist way of looking at things. So it was more that you didn't overload people with a strong narrative, that they would come with their own narrative and connect with the objects. How successful that was another matter. It was, yeah, I would have said it was unclear what the storyline was and what you might get out of it. It was more that you would focus on an individual object and then another individual object. So these are some of the ways that we wanted to change things. So we wanted to root things in people and not just know what an object did, but what did it mean for somebody to use it? What sorts of people used it? What were their lives like? We wanted to make that interpretation not just on our own, informing and broadcasting to others, but to work with our audiences, particularly as a lot of you will know, working with rural collections, that there are experts who know quite a lot more than some museum curators about collections, and we need their expertise to bring the objects alive. We wanted to rebalance it. The displays were quite technologically focused in the past, and then we did have domestic collections. I feel like there was maybe in the 60s, late 60s, 70s, that there was a lot more collecting of social history items. So we could tell the story of what people's homes were like a little bit, rather than it all being about farming technology. And then this point about presenting the collections for a generation that would not remember the way that life was when these objects were being used. So here are some of the things that come from our activity plan, and this was something we submitted to the lottery to say this is how we're going to move forward, and they come in different themes. So this is how Merle would work about thinking about the countryside. So we were going to move away from telling the story of agriculture and farming as the focal point. Adopt a critical perspective on the countryside as a construct full of meanings and in flux. So we wanted to challenge people about issues relating to the countryside, and that's very much what you'll hear more of from Ollie in a bit. But the English countryside is explored in interesting, revealing, unexpected, critical and fun ways. So maybe surprise people, because I think a lot of people think they know what a rural life museum is going to be like. And we're not like that. You know, we don't operate machinery. We're not farming. We're not an open air site. We're a different kettle of fish. And maybe to surprise people into thinking this is something that you would be interested in. And we've got inject life into the narrative of the English countryside, replacing abstracts with specifics. But I think there was a lot taken for granted that was quite abstract in the old displays, that there were assumptions made that you would know, of course you'd need one of these because there was this issue in the background. But we'd try to be very specific about what farming life was like. And then placing people again at the heart. Merle visitors, so they'd enjoy their time and find their curiosity triggered. Have a paced experience with some keywords: communal, social, convivial, affective, talkative, and come away perhaps surprised by what they've learned. be encouraged to contribute actively to the shaping and meaning around countryside. So very much thinking about working with other groups and other communities to discuss the countryside, not necessarily countryside experts, but people from different communities around Reading. And then enter into a relationship with the museum and other visitors and with content providers as part of their in-gallery experience, be excited by their visit and wish to return. So quite ambitious on the visitors. And then delivering the interpretation would be encouraging visitors to relate to what is unfamiliar, past or mysterious, unknown or historical through personal stories. So that, how would it be for me? What was it like? How can I relate to that experience? So quite sort of personal things. Create open-ended narratives around objects and stories, which allow visitors to make their own meanings and be relevant to all. So quite ambitious, I would say. And some of the key things that we thought we didn't have that we really needed. More space dedicated to reception and shop. And I think that goes to I suppose it's that John Folk type way of thinking of a museum visit. Is the museum visit for the visitor is everything that happens. It's not the bit where you engage with the objects. It's how you get there, how you heard about it, what motivates you, who you're visiting with, how you feel when you're in the display. So I think we were a bit abrupt in the past about you walk in, think, oh, what do I do now? So we've put a lot of effort into our welcome area. In fact, we've expanded it quite significantly with capital work. Signage, we weren't very good on that. Our designers pointed out that we had, they started their visit again with coming from the station. Of course, we don't, unfortunately, have any brown signs that come from the station. We do have brown signs coming from further, actually up the hill, down here. But there still aren't lots of signs around saying where is the museum if you come into Reading Town Centre. But also signage once you get here, that we had a scheme where there were narrative panels, and then there were also individual labels that were tied onto objects, and there were also some interactive type questions, and they'd all been done at different times in different fonts and different people. So something that was improved in that way. Learning facilities was a practical thing, that the building that we moved into, an architect had designed the learning suite to be good enough for about 20 people, and the average school group is about 30 people. So we were sort of 10 short, and that was the physical thing, that we had to knock a section out of the welcome area to accommodate a large group of people. We needed to look at all our AVs, which are very interesting, or were very interesting, but we knew that people were only looking at 1 or 2 of them, so maybe they weren't as engaging. Some of them we've reused in different ways, but we want to review them. More flexibility in the display space. That's a tall order, and I'm not sure we've ever achieved that one, but it certainly was an aim, that we could take sections out and move things around. We have, I think Ollie will describe this when we get around, but we've got 2 sections we've changed in not living memory, within the last 2 years. But it's become yeah, we realise the challenges of it. It's like unpicking a piece of knitting or something. You take that bit out and then you think, oh, I've got to change this, this, and this, and this, and it can unravel quickly. Wireless in the galleries, and that's, touch wood, it will work today. That has been an ongoing problem for us, but we have had it boosted, and we do rely on it quite a lot because we now have information that's supplied via QR codes for people, so it's been important. Opportunities for object handling, and we have been looking recently at object handling for people with visual impairments, and what is the experience going around the museum if you're visually impaired, and where can you handle things. But in the initial stages, it was about setting up a protocol for which of the objects that can be handled from our whole collection, and how do we have a process where they can be selected and used and cared for. So we now have a sort of designated area where we keep handling material that's used in events, and we have volunteers as well who come and do object handling sessions regularly in the galleries for any visitor. Yeah, we want to have trained volunteer interpreter demonstrators. To some extent, we've achieved that. We have regularly welcome volunteers who are at the beginning of the displays and explain to people what's going on. We do have volunteers come in and do things for special events, but I don't think we've ever got as far as there being interpreters in galleries. And one of the issues is we can get the volunteers in, they're very keen to do it, but then the peaks and troughs of the visits themselves, they don't want to come for 2 hours and see 3 people. And it's very hard to guarantee, except with events, that there'll be enough of a throughput of people to talk to. Major revision of the website, which I won't talk about today, but do look at our website because we sweated blood over that over the years. And it's now, I think, is much friendlier, but also very multifaceted. And we've been doing blogs. We've recently started to launch podcasts. We use QR codes that link people back to the website and try to put as much information as possible. The latest challenge that we're looking at is this business of who are the browsers and who are the searchers that want to pinpoint and find an individual item. And as a result of that, we're working on what we call a generous interface. And that is the ability to welcome anyone. That if you're just interested to see what we have, you can move around quite freely and know where to find different things. But if you're absolutely looking to find, do we have this book, or how many of these particular objects do we have, you can find that easily. And it's been quite a challenge for us. Yes, we will ask the lottery for money to do with our particular learning activities. So these are some of the capital works drawings. So you can see on the left-hand side is what it used to look like, and on the right is what we built. So we extended an area of the welcome space out into the garden. And with the glazing, yeah, I think it's very successful in making you feel sort of part of the garden before you get there. It makes it more of an attractive place to go out and do things. In order to create what our designers called I think it was an interpretive spine, the building was basically a big shed, and the objects created the walls, if you like. What they said was that this was far too confusing and we needed to locate the objects within smaller spaces. So we have now got interior walls. And in order to get people down the museum, we had to create one spine, one area, which is an area that's known as town and country, which is a long bit rather than a small enclosed room. And to do that, we had to pull the wall out slightly to create the access. One of the things about the original building is it has an awful lot of pillars. And when the museum was empty, it must have looked really cavernous. Actually, you're hard up against a pillar quite regularly, which creates some problems in moving around the space. And then we created an extension on the end of the museum. And you will see why we did it, but it was essentially for one artefact, and it's one of our Festival of Britain wall hangings, and it just fits in the space. And we had a bespoke case created for it, and it was an artefact that we had always wanted to show, and thought, no, it's impossible. We can't show this massive hanging. So we built a space with the right conditions for it. This is a very quick picture of the layout, which is the key point in it was that we had these walls. So you can see the red is where you walk around. Some of it is not exactly what we produced in the end. But one of the big things I'll show you is that the wagons are now in a sort of car park. And the interesting thing is that the original plans for the museum, that was what the designer or the architect for the building thought would happen. And everyone said that is really dull and it won't bring the wagons alive. So when it was first, the collections were moved in, the new interpretation scheme, the wagons were everywhere. And when we started working with our designers, thinking about storylines and which objects would fit, they would say, right, well, we start with a blank space. We'd say, well, no, we don't start with a blank space because actually all our collections have to be in the building. And so because in the past there'd been a wagon there, we'd have a storyline. And they'd say, well, you have these sorts of objects. And we'd say, well, we also need to put 2 wagons in there. We need to put 3 wagons in there. And they were tearing their hair out. And then eventually they appeared and they said, we've had an idea. And it was this. And we said, oh, that was the old idea. And they said, no, this works so much better, please. So they are there in a car park. But what it does enable you to do is to compare and contrast, and we've created a more of an interpretive scheme that's about the areas that they come from, which a predecessor of ours, a curator, Garrett Jenkins, wrote a seminal work on what were the differences between wagons made in different parts of the country. And it enables us to be wagon free elsewhere. We do have, is it 2 we've got? We've got one in
cart and 3 wagons.
3 wagons. We've still created around.
That includes the bar, which we've acquired
yes,
since.
We haven't stopped.
We stuck another one in. We stuck another couple.
Yes, but we've
returned the load as well.
Yeah, we've contained them a little bit. So that's the plan. You can see the garden is quite a significant area of the museum, and I'll talk a bit I think tomorrow about that or later on today. And this comes from our designs. I don't know how visible it is, but this is just to show you some of the process we went through. This is a space that you will see soon, which is our year on the farm. And so there was a lot of discussion about what goes where, what's the scheme. And you will see that there is a spring, summer, autumn, winter scheme going on there. And then behind that, there are what are the activities? So that we've covered the things that happen in spring, the things that happen in summer, so on. And the route as well. And we did this for every space. And then beyond that, the designers did these elevations, because what we've ended up with is a combination of the artifacts, the interpretation, the written interpretation, but also the archives that we have to support things. And for instance, we had used photographs in the past, but they tended to be added on, so you'd have a booklet with photographs. But we've used the photographs in order to explain what the object's about. So as near as we can do it, if there is an artifact, we try to show a person using it. And then we don't have to write a label about this was done for blah, 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 blah. You can see it from pictures. And a lot of work went into the sight lines of these. So that you're probably not aware of it unless you sort of think about it, but nothing is there by chance. It's all about where's your eye line and which are the big objects and the smaller objects and which ones can go near the front of the displays and which ones further back and how to see them. And I don't think we could have done any of this without a design team. And I think it's worked very well for us, showing a massive range of objects. Last few slides, I want to show you some reactions, and it's very difficult to. We're now onto our 4th comments book, and we're looking at trying to get some software where we can start sort of keywording which are the things that come up. But you get the qualitative stuff is really interesting, but I don't think it's been possible to say there's a majority view about this or that so far. What I can say is that we have very high ratings on things like TripAdvisor. We recently took everything off Google to look at the reviews we have on Google, and very, very high scores on those. And we get a lot of positive feedback for events. And I would say that I'm guessing when we do the comments book in a statistical way that the comments are very positive there. Of course, you can say that it's people who like things often make comments. But in my experience, there are people who hate the displays who also make comments. So this is typical of people saying, it's very rare for you to make such an effort to explain things, have large print, wonderful visit. if people have seen a film, they then think, well, why didn't you make another film? And we all know that these sorts of projects are quite expensive and difficult to do. And we're very lucky that we have, a predecessor of mine did a series of 10 films about crafts, and they work really well, but having the money to do a whole set of other ones would be a whole project in its own right, but maybe we should do. And yeah, it's very pleasing to get international visits and people motivated. They're not all wonderful though. Excellent collection, but sorry that a number of items are not fully labelled. Also, much of the collection is not properly displayed. We were turned out of the mezzanine gallery. I have no idea why they were turned out of the mezzanine gallery. It might have been that they arrived at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, usually.
This is a fantastic and socially significant collection. The public should be able to see it and appreciate it fully. And then this one, very, very good work in terms of rearranging and finding innovative ways to show the museum's rich properties to the audience. But reading on the storyline that Britain voted to leave the EU when actually it was 52% of that voted to do that in 2016 is quite misleading and upsetting to the rest of the 48%. I thought, oh, right, I very much hope to see this revised in the future. We have another one where we've got a small section that's devoted to hunting. And the first few weeks we had a comment saying, you are clearly completely opposed to hunting, very biased. And then another one, not that long after, saying, you're clearly extremely supportive of hunting. And people feel strongly about it. This was, we'll see it downstairs, but this was a space that we had to consider what were the key events of rural history. And we did this because we know that the national curriculum that we have in this country is very, very thin of rural history. The children learn very quickly about industrialisation and the movement into the towns and cities. And they could perhaps do half an hour at school on rural history, and that's it. So it means that a lot of people have nothing to base it on now. So we tried to put some of these issues out as sort of anchor points of the 19th and 20th century. And this happened to be, the Brexit vote was the same year we opened, so we thought it was perfect, but obviously didn't please somebody. Superb museum, rich resources, staff are excellent, good for children, especially the lambing interactive screens. Please label the displays. This is a theme that carries on that we are still grappling with, which is that we were putting more information than had ever been out, but in some ways, the more you provide, the more people think, what else do I need to know? And we talked to the designers about being very object rich and how we would label things. And they said, whatever you do, don't have an individual label for every object, because you'll walk around and there'll just be a sea of little white paper things, and it will ruin the drama of seeing the collections. So we went along with them, and they said we should use postcards, which you can see downstairs. And they had an idea that we would somehow sell a portfolio of these postcards, and it would be a themed thing that would make us lots of money. We never got beyond creating the postcards themselves, which have silhouettes of a section of the display and then a numbering system. And you can see the outline, and the numbering is really the catalogue number, so you can find it on our online database. But it's quite an ambitious thing, and it's also very, very difficult to print them big enough for everything that has to fit on there, because the postcards are A5, and somebody said they're way too small. So I tried to blow them up to a good size for visually impaired, and they were like this. And we have got one set of them, which people can borrow, but it's like going around with a wobble board or something to look at the display. So we haven't really perfected that, but we have moved into more digital labelling. But it's an interesting one, how you satisfy a range of different needs of knowing what things are and why. We've got one more, I think. Awful. No dates on anything, so no idea of how this developed over time. That was an interesting one for us as well, because the collecting policy we had originally was 1750 to 1950. Most of our collections are late 19th century to early 20th century. Some of them do speak to a technology from an earlier era, but it isn't right. We talked about doing a chronological display, but actually it doesn't really work that well, because it also makes an assumption that people were using this and then they stopped doing that and they started using this. And we all know that with farming, the technology is sort of massively overlapped. So that horses, for instance, are not a sort of ancient way of farming. They are ancient, but they're also go well into the 20th century. So we really felt we'd go more thematic, but then there are always people who like the chronology, and maybe we have not put enough in. There's always the people who loved what you had before. So museum seems to have lost something in its rehab, the lowering of the ceiling heights, which we actually haven't done, which is like fantastic.
They're grown. They're not a child anymore, are they?
No, they're grown, yeah. No, it's more that we have a portable steam engine which has a funnel, and in order to place it in the new position, we had to take the funnel down. And actually, our conservator, who completely agreed that the funnel should be there, has since moved it slightly so we can fit the tunnel in. But it would have, if the designers could see now, they're really annoyed because it's now at an angle.
We did introduce a mezzanine floor to put ploughs on, where the wagons were up on.
That's true.
So there is a ceiling that wasn't there before, but it doesn't necessarily diminish things.
But it's not an area that you could go into, so you wouldn't have ever.
The wagons would have been lowering over you.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes. No, I think he was referring to why you couldn't see the funnel anymore.
Gives us mention the steam engine.
Yeah. But this is a contrasting one that we are clearly appealing to families and children, and it's an engaging. The little nature movie, well, we'll see that. That was this was an interesting one that we thought we needed something to set the scene, that we're an outdoor subject matter, but we're completely indoors, which is very unusual. And so how do we set the scene for what people are going to see? And we thought we would create an AV that perhaps showed a British landscape over a long period of time. We thought that's a perfect idea. And then we realised we didn't have time to film it over a year. We had months to do it. So the suggestion was that we should do an animation. And we were very divided actually about whether this was a good idea, and the thought that we were somehow dumbing things down. And even right at the last minute, when the film was there, we had a discussion with the designers as well. The designers really didn't like it and said you'd be better off just having an AV with historic pictures. But I was persuaded in the end to risk it. And the animation is sort of 2.5 minutes long. And it goes through every season, day and night, and every sort of weather you can think of. And it is a cartoon, but things are constantly growing, and animals appear from time to time, and you see light and dark and all the contrasts. And it has proved phenomenally popular with families. And we now have it as an app, which people can download at home. And we've had parents saying, I use this with my child, it's very tranquil, they love it. And it's become a sort of exhibit its own right. But it's interesting to think, does it do the job of making you think about the display? I don't know. But it's very, very popular with our young families. I think that might be it. No. I like the middle one. We are standard bearers for visitor attractions in the future. Yeah, and wonderful transformation, being able to see everything that was previously hidden away. Real achievement, enjoyable experience, well done. One thing we're seeing is the film that we used to have. So we continue to do that. I think that really is it. But, no, that works overtime. Definitely preferred it before. Cards are the best feature, and now very hemmed in, feels cramped, hard to fully appreciate them. Don't like the interactive bits. Where are the rats? We had a rat trail for many years that was a learning officer that we had who's since gone. And it was incredibly popular. And it was very frustrating because if you went around town and talked to people, they'd say, "Oh, you're the place with the rats." No, they're stuffed rats. We've got this wonderful collection. It's not what we're about. And so we tried to get rid of them. And this was in the early days of the redisplay. And we got so many bring back the rats that we have done that. They look a bit more like hamsters now. We've invested into some. They're rather more beautiful looking rats because they were sort of the cheapest IKEA rat before. But we do have to keep them in there, and the rat spotting activity for children, it will never go, I think.
It's a little more nuanced than it was, because we did have Karen Sayer, who's a professor of agricultural history, feed into advising on that. She had a fellowship that was focused on pest management and particularly on rats on farms.
Yes.
So they're located. Some of them are located in places that make sense in a kind of agricultural context, kind of way. Not that you necessarily know that.
So that really is it.